Georgetown, Washington, D.C., October 12, 1964. President John F. Kennedy has been dead for 10 months. The Warren Commission published its final report on the assassination 2 weeks ago, and in a converted brick garage on a quiet street off Wisconsin Avenue, a 43-year-old woman finishes a painting, she locks her studio door, and walks out for her lunch hour. Her name is Mary Pinchot Meyer. She's the niece of a 2-term governor of Pennsylvania, the ex-wife of a senior official at the Central Intelligence Agency, the sister-in-law of one of the most influential journalists in America, and for the last 2 years of his life, she was the secret lover of a recently assassinated president of the United States, John F. Kennedy. She's been keeping a diary, and at 12:25 in the afternoon, somebody shoots Mary Pinchot Meyer on a canal towpath behind her house. Now, there's an eyewitness across the canal. He sees the killer's face, but by the time the Metropolitan Police get there, Mary's gone. The path's sealed off within an hour. A man's in handcuffs by 1:30 p.m. Charges filed by sundown. And that should be the end of it. It isn't, because within hours of Mary's death, the chief of counterintelligence at the Central Intelligence Agency, he shows up at her locked front door, he lets himself inside and starts tearing the house apart. He's looking for one specific thing, Mary's diary, and when he finds it, he's going to take it home and burn it. His name's James Jesus Angleton. He's the most feared man inside the agency. He's godfather to 2 of Mary's children. Now, it's been 61 years. Nobody's ever been convicted of Mary Pinchot Meyer's murder. Nobody's ever seen the inside of her diary. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation, they destroyed her case file in 1988. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History, coming at you from the great state of Vermont. I want to know what Mary knew. Stay with me. Okay, let's start with what actually happened on that towpath. The Chesapeake and the Ohio Canal runs 184 miles from Georgetown all the way to Cumberland, Maryland. It opened in 1831. It stopped commercial service in 1924. Fast forward to 1964, it's a federally protected walking path that runs right through downtown Washington. The towpath itself is narrow, maybe 10 feet wide, trees on one side, water on the other. It's quiet. People walk their dogs there. Joggers from the Pentagon use it on their lunch breaks. Mary Pinchot Meyer walks it almost every day. At 12:25 on October 12, 1964, the mechanic across the canal who saw the shooting pulled the alarm from the nearest emergency call box. The Metropolitan Police Department gets there within minutes. They seal the towpath off at both ends. They lock the parkway above. They set up a perimeter from Key Bridge all the way down to the riverbank. Mary's body's on the path. It's face up. Powder blue sweatshirt soaked through, 3 gunshot wounds from a .38 caliber. There's no purse or identification, and the cops have no idea who she is. She's out there in the cold for hours. Homicide Detective Bernard Crook eventually figures it out. Detective Crook takes possession of Mary's clothing before the body's moved. He's inspecting it for evidence, and he notices something stitched into the silk lining of one of her bloody gloves. It's a name written in blue ink. It's right next to the Mark Cross brand stamp, Meyer, so he runs the name. Comes up with a 43-year-old Georgetown woman named Mary Pinchot Meyer, calls it in, and dispatch tells him to be very careful what he says on the radio. Now, about that suspect, the MPD had a man in handcuffs by 1:30 that afternoon, about an hour after the murder. His name's Ray Crump Jr. He's 25 years old, a laborer for a Washington construction firm. He's married, recently released from a 60-day sentence for petty larceny. Does this sound like a murder suspect in 1964? Not so much. When the cops find him, he's standing on the rocks at the edge of the Potomac, about 200 yards from where Mary was shot. He's soaking wet from the chest down. There's scratches all over his right hand. His pants are torn at the knee, and when officers ask him what he's doing down there, Crump tells them, "I was down there fishing and lost my rod." The cops look around. There's no fishing rod, no tackle box, no bait, no fish. And the jacket Ray Crump put on when he walked out of his house that morning, that's gone. His wife Helena later tells investigators he was wearing a light tan windbreaker when he left. And he can't tell the cops where it went. Henry Wiggins, the mechanic, he's brought to the scene from the call box. He picks Ray Crump out of a lineup, says, "That's the man I saw across the canal." Now by sundown, Crump is charged with first-degree murder. This is the kind of police work that closes a case in 4 hours. In a normal case, but something's off, because the cops can't find the murder weapon. They dredge the canal, same for the Potomac. They sweep the woods. There's no gun. A few hours later, somebody recovers a man's light tan windbreaker from the rocks along the Potomac on the same bank where the killer fled. Helena Crump confirms it. That's her husband's jacket. So now the cops have a windbreaker, a man with scratches, an eyewitness, still no murder weapon, and a suspect who stands 5'3". Remember that. The next morning's newspapers go to print, and the Washington Post leads with the headline, "Woman Dies in Robbery on Towpath." The New York Times, "Woman Painter Shot and Killed on Canal Towpath in Capitol." The Herald Tribune, "Mrs. Kennedy's Friend Slain in Washington." Robbery. That's the official theory in the first 24 hours. Mary Pinchot Meyer was on her usual lunch hour walk. A man approached her, demanded her purse. Things went sideways. He shot her twice and ran. It's tragic, but it's straightforward, except Mary wasn't carrying a purse. The Wire also identifies Mary as a personal friend of Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy. Now that part's true, but it's not even close to the most interesting thing about her. Newspaper readers across America wake up to those headlines on October 13th, 1964. The dead woman was a robbery victim, a friend of Jacqueline Kennedy, a painter. Nobody had it right, not even close. To grasp what really happened on that towpath, we need to go back. October 14th, 1920, New York City. A baby girl named Mary Pinchot is born into one of the most prominent progressive political families in America. Her father is Amos Pinchot, a wealthy lawyer, and founder of the Bull Moose Party that ran Theodore Roosevelt for president in 1912. Personally bankrolled a socialist magazine called The Masses. Her uncle is Gifford Pinchot, the first chief of the United States Forest Service under Teddy Roosevelt, and the two-term governor of Pennsylvania that Wire stories are going to mention 44 years later. Her mother's Ruth Pickering Pinchot, a writer, a Vassar graduate, politically left of her husband. This is a family of money, principle, and big ideas. Mary grows up at Gray Towers. That's the Pinchot family estate in Milford, Pennsylvania. 41 rooms, a stone castle on a hill above the Delaware River. She has an older half-sister named Rosamond Pinchot. Rosamond's beautiful. She's magnetic. She becomes a silent film actress in the 1920s. Interesting. In 1938, when Mary's 17 years old, Rosamond ends her own life at 33. It's tragic, and not the last time the Pinchot family is going to lose somebody young and bright. Mary attends Brearley School in New York, then Vassar College, class of 1942. A classmate describes her as the most brilliant and beautiful girl in her class. While she's dating a Princeton student named William Atwood, Mary goes to him with a dance at the Choate School in Connecticut. It's 1938, and it's there that she meets a 21-year-old Choate alum visiting from Harvard. And his name is John F. Kennedy. They dance, they flirt. He's already JFK. She's already Mary Pinchot. It's a 5-minute encounter at a prep school dance. It's another noteworthy event. Now, 3 years later is Pearl Harbor. A Marine officer named Cord Meyer Jr. enlists. Cord comes from another notable American family. His father, Cord Meyer Sr., is a United States diplomat who served in Cuba, Sweden, and Washington. His mother is Catherine Blair Thaw of New York, and we have a detail in Cord's own family history that we should flag. When Cord's mother was 12 years old, her father's half-brother, a man named Harry Thaw, shot the famous architect Stanford White on the rooftop of Madison Square Garden in front of a packed house over the showgirl Evelyn Nesbit. The original trial of the century, 1906. The Thaw family fled to England to escape the publicity. So, Mary Pinchot is about to marry into a family that has already been the center of one of the most sensational American murders in the 20th century. Cord ships out for the Pacific. July 1944, Guam. A Japanese grenade lands in his foxhole. He covers his face with his arm. The grenade costs him his left eye and embeds shrapnel in his skull for the rest of his life. And around the same time in Okinawa, his twin brother Quentin Meyer is killed in action. Cord ships home a decorated officer. He's half blind, half a twin, and he's a committed pacifist. He writes a famous essay called Waves of Darkness. It's about the horror of combat. The Atlantic Monthly publishes it in 1946. In 1947, he becomes the first president of an organization called the United World Federalists, which advocates for global government to prevent another world war. This is the man Mary Pinchot marries on April 19, 1945, in her mother's living room in New York City. She's 24, he's 24. They have 3 sons. Quentin Pinchot Meyer in 1945, named for Cord's dead twin, Michael Pinchot Meyer in 1947, and Mark Pinchot Meyer in 1950. In the early 50s, Cord's gone to work for a brand new federal agency called the Central Intelligence Agency. Meyer's family settles in McLean, Virginia, outside Washington, a household of principals and 3 little boys. And in 1956, December 18th, late afternoon, 9-year-old Michael Pinchot Meyer is walking home from a friend's house in McLean. He steps off the curb to cross the road. A car comes around the corner. The driver doesn't see him, and Michael's killed instantly. This is the day the Meyer marriage really ends. Mary will tell friends years later that something in her shut down forever the night Michael died. She and Cord stay married for 2 more years, but mostly as a formality. They divorce in 1958. Mary takes Quentin and Mark, moves out of the McLean house, away from the agency wives and the Langley commute. She buys a 4-room townhouse on 34th Street, Northwest Washington, in the heart of Georgetown. The townhouse is 3 blocks from her younger sister, Toni. Now, Toni's married to a young rising journalist named Ben Bradley. Ben Bradley just happens to be a personal friend and neighbor of the Massachusetts senator named John F. Kennedy, the same JFK Mary danced with at Choate in 1938. So stay with me on the geography here. By 1959, Mary Pinchot Meyer is a 39-year-old divorced mother of 2. She paints full-time out of a converted brick garage on Wisconsin Avenue. She studies with the painter Kenneth Noland and circulates in Washington Color School. She lives 3 blocks from her sister and Ben Bradley. She lives 4 blocks from the home of John and Jackie Kennedy. And less than 2 years from now, the man she danced with at a prep school in 1938 is gonna walk into the White House as the 35th President of the United States. And Mary Pinchot Meyer is gonna walk in right behind him. There's something you have to see here. 277 pages. That's how thick the FBI file on Cord Meyer is. 277 pages of declassified federal surveillance. It's released to the public for the very first time in September of 2020. We sat down with all of it, and what we found in there is definitely not what we expected, because the FBI file on Cord Meyer isn't really about Cord, it's about his wife. Let me show you what I mean. The earliest entry in the 277 pages is dated 1947. It comes from Boston. A special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is sitting across a table from an informant identified as T8. The informant is reporting on a young woman, 26 years old, recently graduated from Vassar College. The informant gives the FBI a name, Mary Pinchot. This is 4 years before Cord Meyer ever walked into the Central Intelligence Agency, and the federal government already had eyes on his wife. Why is that? Because of a piece of paper she signed in 1944. When she was a college senior, 23 years old, Mary Pinchot registered as a member of the American Labor Party of New York. The ALP backed Franklin Roosevelt. Later it backed Henry Wallace. In 1947, the House Un-American Activities Committee labels it a communist front. In 1956, the New York State Legislature votes to dissolve it. In 1944, Mary signed a card, and in 1947, the FBI opened a file. That file is going to follow her for the rest of her life. Now, in 1951, Cord Meyer Jr. joins the Central Intelligence Agency. He's recruited personally by the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, Allen Dulles. Cord's given a division to run, the International Organization Division. Sounds boring, I know, but it isn't. The IOD is one of the most secretive offices inside the agency. It runs covert action through American cultural life. It bankrolls foreign student groups, labor unions, academic journals, and it runs a sprawling propaganda apparatus inside the American press. You may have heard of it. After it's exposed by Carl Bernstein and the Church Committee in the mid-70s, the public's going to give it a name, Operation Mockingbird. According to the Church Committee's own final report, this is the operation that maintains covert relationships with American journalists and editors at Newsweek, CBS, the New York Times, the Washington Post, wire services, foreign bureaus, magazine columnists. Reporters across more than 25 major American news organizations are taking secret agency assignments or running CIA-supplied material as straight news. And the man running the division, running the program? Cord Meyer Jr., Mary's husband. Curious. The husband of the woman the FBI has been quietly building a file on since 1947 is the senior CIA officer running propaganda operations against the American public. 2 federal agencies and 1 marriage. And it's about to get worse. Late summer 1953, Cord Meyer Jr. walks into the CIA headquarters on a Monday morning, head of his division, a decorated combat veteran, Yale graduate, 2 years into the job, and a security officer stops him at the door, hands him a piece of paper. Cord is being suspended without pay, effective immediately. He's escorted out of the building. That piece of paper the security officer hands him is in the FBI file. It's a statement of charges from the Central Intelligence Agency against one of its own division chiefs. It's signed by acting deputy director of the agency, a man named L.K. White. Charge number 1 reads, verbatim, "Your wife, Mrs. Pinchot Meyer, is alleged to have registered as a member of the American Labor Party of New York in 1944, at which time it was reportedly under extreme left-wing or communist domination." The number 1 reason the CIA gives for shutting down a senior officer in 1953 is what his wife did in college. The translation here: if you're inside the federal government in 1953 and you want to take down a senior CIA officer, you use his wife to do it. And it gets dirtier. The Bureau sends agents to Massachusetts to chase down a second informant. This one claims to have overheard a conversation between Cord Meyer and the famous Harvard astronomer Harlow Shapley. It's in a private home, sometime in the late 40s. The subject of that conversation, per the federal file, American fascism and Russian democracy. The FBI mentions 5 years later a philosophical conversation between 2 educated men in someone's living room in 1948, and they're using it to potentially destroy a man's career. It's kind of diabolical. But the most disturbing document in the entire file isn't about Cord, it's about Mary. She's 33 years old, she has 3 small children, her husband was just canned. Mary Pinchot Meyer sits down at a desk in Washington, D.C. and writes a sworn affidavit defending him. The affidavit goes into the federal file. The affidavit in 2026 is still classified. The body of it is blacked out under FOIA exemptions for personal privacy, classified information, and law enforcement personnel. All we can see is the heading. I, Mary Pinchot Meyer, being duly sworn, do depose and say that 61 years after her unsolved murder, the federal government is still refusing to release what Mary Pinchot Meyer said under oath in 1953. Why is that? You tell me. The affidavit works, whatever's in it. Cord's cleared, he's reinstated and actually promoted. By 1962, he's not just back at the agency, he's running covert operations for the entire deputy director for plans. It's one of the most powerful clandestine officers in American intelligence. A daily working colleague of a man named James Jesus Angleton, the same Angleton you met at the start of this video. And while Cord rises, the FBI file on his wife grows. Year after year, page after page. You'd think it would all still be there. It isn't. April 6, 1988, that's the date the FBI claims it shredded Mary Pinchot Meyer's standalone file. So 24 years after her unsolved murder, 11 years after Cord's retired from the agency, the Bureau says that it was a routine records purge. Right. All that survives are the pages they didn't get to. The Cord file, the 277 pages, where Mary lives in the margins of someone else's investigation. That's all we have. That's everything they're willing to leave us. Now stay with me, because less than a year from where we're standing right now in 1962, Mary Pinchot Meyer is going to walk into the West Wing of the White House. She's going to become the secret lover of the most watched president of the 20th century. She's going to be exposed to classified information no civilian was supposed to even hear. And she's going to start writing it down in a diary. Tuesday, October 3rd, 1961, 7:40 p.m. A name gets entered into the Secret Service gate log at the east entrance to the White House. Mrs. Mary Meyer. She signed in to see the President of the United States. Jackie Kennedy is in Newport with the children. The visit doesn't end with Mary becoming Kennedy's lover. Not yet. It's a social visit. An old family friend dropping by. That's how it starts. But over the next 2 years, Mary Pinchot Meyer's name is going to appear in those Secret Service logs again and again and again. 13 documented private evening visits to the president. 6 official White House dinner dances. Multiple phone calls transferred straight from the Oval Office to a townhouse on 34th Street, all logged by the president's personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln. So Mary isn't just visiting, she's invited to policy meetings. The president asks her opinion on national security. She is, per friends and per the Kennedy library logs, the woman Kennedy talks to when he needs to think out loud without watching his words. And per those Secret Service gate logs, every single one of Mary's documented private evening visits, with one exception, happens on a day when Jackie Kennedy is verifiably out of town. Now, the affair between Mary Pinchot Meyer and President John F. Kennedy never surfaces during her lifetime. It's buried so deep, even Mary's closest friends in Georgetown don't speak of it in public until February 23, 1976. That's 11 and a half years after she's shot. That day, the National Enquirer publishes a story sourced to a man named James Truitt. Truitt's a longtime Newsweek editor and Mary's old friend. He sells the story for cash. He says Mary had a 2-year secret affair with the president. He says Mary kept a diary and that Mary brought LSD into the White House residence. The Bradleys deny it. The Kennedy team denies it. Then Tony Bradley confirms the affair to the Enquirer and calls it a fling. 5 years later, in 1981, James Truitt is found dead in his home. But Truitt isn't a lone source on what's happening inside the residence, because in April 1962, Mary Pinchot Meyer gets on a train. She rides up to Cambridge, Massachusetts. She walks into the office of a 41-year-old Harvard psychology lecturer, a man named Timothy Leary. You know the name. Leary in 1962 runs the Harvard Psilocybin Project. He's been giving graduate students, theology students, prison inmates, and a long list of artists, writers, and curious aristocrats controlled dosages of psilocybin and LSD as part of a clinical research experiment. A year from now, Harvard's going to fire him. 5 years from now, he's going to be a federal fugitive. 10 years from now, Richard Nixon's going to call him the most dangerous man in America. This is the man Mary Pinchot Meyer walks in to see in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the spring of 1962, the mistress of the President of the United States, and she has a very specific question. Leary writes these conversations in his 1983 memoir, Flashbacks. He says Mary tells him, quote, "I've heard Allen Ginsberg on the radio and TV shows saying that if Khrushchev and Kennedy would take LSD together, they'd end world conflict. Isn't that the idea? To get powerful men to turn on?" Mary wants Leary to teach her how to do that safely. She tells him she's already started. She visits him multiple times over the next year and a half. Per Nina Burley's reconstruction of the logs, the dates of Mary's documented meetings with Leary in Cambridge line up directly with the dates of her documented private meetings with the president at the White House. She's running back and forth, Boston to Washington, Harvard to the West Wing. Now, I have to be very clear about one thing. We have zero contemporaneous documentary evidence that Mary Pinchot Meyer ever administered any psychedelic to the President of the United States. The diary's gone. The witnesses are dead. The entire account comes from Timothy Leary in a book published 19 years after Mary was murdered, almost a decade after he was made a federal fugitive himself. So he's not the most reliable person on earth. But there's a moment in Leary's account we have to sit with. Per Leary, sometime in 1963, Mary comes to him for a final time. She's distressed. She's crying. She tells him, quote, "It was all going so well. We had 8 intelligent women turning on the most powerful men in Washington. And then we got found out. I was such a fool. I made a mistake in recruitment. A wife snitched on us, and I'm scared. A wife snitched." If you're inside the federal intelligence apparatus in 1963 and a wife tells you that a circle of Washington women led by a recently divorced ex of a senior CIA officer is dosing the President of the United States with hallucinogens inside the White House while also influencing his policy, you take that personally. October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world goes on the edge of nuclear war for 13 days. Kennedy ignores the unanimous recommendations of his Joint Chiefs of Staff to bomb the Soviet missile sites in Cuba. He chooses a naval quarantine. The Soviets blink, the crisis ends. According to friends of Mary's, quoted by Bradley, Burley, and Janney, Mary was at the White House with Kennedy throughout the worst of those 13 days. She would tell people in private that she helped him get the world through it. Now, June 10th, 1963, Kennedy delivers an announcement speech at American University in Washington, D.C. He calls for, quote, a peace not for Americans only, but for all men and women. He calls for an end to the Cold War. It's one of the most peace-forward speeches any American president has ever given. Most of his cabinet doesn't see it coming. His Joint Chiefs of Staff are furious. The Central Intelligence Agency is less than thrilled. 6 weeks later, on July 25th, 1963, the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom signed the Limited Test Ban Treaty. 3 months after that, on October 11th, 1963, Kennedy signs National Security Action Memorandum 263, ordering the withdrawal of the first 1,000 American military advisors from Vietnam. Now, 41 days later, President John F. Kennedy is killed in the back of a Lincoln Continental driving through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. 3 days later, on November 25th, 1963, Mary Pinchot Meyer attends his funeral. She wears dark glasses. She doesn't speak to anyone she doesn't have to speak to. She leaves alone. Mary walks home to her townhouse on 34th Street. She picks up a small notebook from her studio. It's about 50 pages. She opens it and starts writing. She writes for 10 months. And on the afternoon of October 12, 1964, the diary stops. Something changes in Mary Pinchot Meyer after Dallas. Her friends notice it first. She walks alone for hours on the C&O Canal towpath. She stops drinking with the Georgetown crowd. She starts asking questions. Now, within 2 weeks of Kennedy's death, Mary calls Timothy Leary in Cambridge. Now, per flashbacks, she's terrified. She tells Leary the official story isn't right. She talks to Kenny O'Donnell, Kennedy's chief of staff, who was riding 2 cars behind the president in Dallas. She talks to William Walton, an artist and Kennedy confidant who'd been sent to Moscow by Bobby Kennedy on a secret diplomatic mission just days after the funeral. She's doing her own investigation. Then comes September 24th, 1964. The Warren Commission releases its final report on the assassination of John F. Kennedy. The official conclusion? Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, shot the President of the United States. No conspiracy, no second gunman, no CIA, no Cubans, no Russians, no mob. Just one disgruntled ex-Marine and a rifle on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. That's it. Right. Mary Pinchot Meyer buys the abridged paperback edition. She brings it home to 34th Street. She reads it with the eye of a trained editor. And per multiple friends inside Mary's circle, Mary Pinchot Meyer hits the roof. She drives out to McLean. She confronts her ex-husband Cord Meyer and tells him that the Warren report is a lie. She tells him she's going public with what she's figured out. Now, you remember what Cord Meyer's job is in 1964? You remember who Cord Meyer's closest friend at the agency is, right? Per author Leo Damar, who spent years interviewing people inside Mary's circle, Cord goes directly to James Jesus Angleton with what Mary's saying. And what happens after that depends on who you believe. Per Nina Burley's 1998 interview with a CIA officer's wife named Joan Browse, Angleton, in private, bragged on more than one occasion that he wiretapped Mary's telephone and bugged her bedroom. Per Leo Damore, Angleton ran a full surveillance team on Mary in the weeks leading up to her death. The man Damore identified as part of the surveillance team is a name we'll come back to, William Mitchell. He matters. And per Mary's own statements to her own friends, starting in January 1964, somebody starts breaking into her townhouse. She's away for the weekend, she comes home, her things have been moved. She returns from a summer trip, Somebody's been inside. A heavy basement door she can barely move, even with the help of her 2 sons. She finds it ajar. Now, the last incident happened just weeks before her death. She walks home to 34th Street and sees somebody walking out of her front door. She tells friends that she has no idea what they're after, but she does have an idea what they're after. Monday, October 12th, 1964, Mary Pinchot Meyer locks her studio door. She walks to the towpath behind her house, and you already know what happened next. What I haven't told you yet is what happens that night. Word of Mary's death reaches the Truids in Tokyo within 24 hours. Jim Truid is Newsweek Japan bureau chief. Anne Truid, one of Mary's 2 closest female friends. The Truids moved to Tokyo earlier in 1964. But before they left, Mary told Anne something very specific. Anne Truid will later swear in writing that Mary said, quote, "If anything ever happens to me, I want you to make sure James Angleton takes possession of my diary." Mary Pinchot Meyer left explicit instructions that if anything ever happened to her, her diary was going to go to the chief of CIA counterintelligence. You can read that 2 ways. Now, either Mary trusted Angleton as a family friend to keep her affair with the President of the United States out of the tabloids, or Mary knew that she was being watched and was leaving a paper trail. Either way, Anne Truid picks up the phone in Tokyo, she calls Washington, and she eventually reaches James Angleton at the Bradleys' house on N Street. The Bradleys and Angletons mobilize immediately. According to Ben Bradley's 1995 memoir, A Good Life, the next morning, Tuesday, October 13th, Bradley and his wife, Toni, walk to Mary's house on 34th Street to look for her diary. They unlock the front door, and they find James Jesus Angleton already inside. Bradley writes, quote, "We found his presence odd, to say the least, but took him at his word." They search the house. They don't find any diary. And later that same day, Bradley and Toni decide to check Mary's studio in the alley behind her own N Street house. The studio has a padlock on it, and Bradley's don't have the key. Later that day, Bradley and Toni decide to check Mary's studio in the alley behind their own N Street house. The studio has a padlock on it, and the Bradleys don't have a key. So Ben goes to grab some tools. And when they walk back to the studio, the chief of counterintelligence for the Central Intelligence Agency is standing at the door, picking the padlock himself. Bradley writes that Angleton, quote, "would have been red-faced if his face could have gotten red." He leaves almost without saying a word. Bradley and Toni enter Mary's studio. About an hour later, Toni finds it. It's a small notebook with a pretty cover, about 50 pages. Most of it's paint swatches and color notes, but about 10 pages contain phrases describing a love affair. The lover is never mentioned, per Toni Bradley telling the National Enquirer in 1976, quote, "There were some JFKs in it." That's Bradley's 1995 version of how Mary's diary was found. Now I'm going to show you the other version. July 1965, Ray Crump's murder trial. Ben Bradley takes the witness stand under oath. The prosecutor's the assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, a man named Alfred Hantman. Now, this is the exchange that appears in the official court record. I'm reading it verbatim now. Hantman asked Bradley, quote, "Other than the usual articles of Mrs. Meyer's avocation, did you find there any other articles of her personal property?" Bradley answers, quote, "There was a pocketbook there." Hantman asks, "What did the pocketbook contain, sir?" Bradley answers, "It contained a wallet, some cosmetics and pencils, things like that." Bradley was then excused from the witness stand. Now, under oath in 1965, Ben Bradley didn't testify that he and his wife found his sister-in-law's diary describing a 2-year love affair with the assassinated President of the United States. He testified that he found a pocketbook with cosmetics in it. But 30 years later, in his best-selling memoir, the diary suddenly exists. Curious. So what actually happened in that house? Peter Janney argues in his book Mary's Mosaic that the diary Bradley and Toni found in the studio on October 13th wasn't Mary's real diary. Janney argues Mary's real diary, the one that named names, the one that documented what Mary figured out about Dallas, was already gone by the time the Bradleys arrived. Janney suggests that James Angleton retrieved the real diary on the night of October 12th, the night Mary died, when he allegedly returned to her empty house after police cleared the scene to, quote, rescue 3 kittens. That account first comes from the original 1976 investigation by Ron Rosenbaum and Philip Noble in New Times Magazine. Janney builds on it. Now, I can't prove to you that James Jesus Angleton broke into Mary's house on the night of her murder and took the real diary, but here's what we can document. Angleton was inside Mary's house the morning after the murder, before her sister and brother-in-law arrived. Angleton was caught picking the padlock at Mary's studio the same afternoon. The Truitt and the Angleton wives later wrote a letter swearing that the diary was given to Angleton by Tony. Angleton kept the diary in a CIA safe for years. Eventually, Angleton returned it to Tony Bradley, and in 1976, Tony Bradley burned the diary in her own fireplace 3 weeks after the National Enquirer published Jim Truitt's story about the affair. Nobody outside that circle has ever seen the inside of Mary Pinchot Meyer's diary. By the time the trial of the man accused of shooting Mary Pinchot Meyer begins in July 1965, the only document in Mary's hand that addressed her relationship with the dead President of the United States is locked in a safe at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. The chief of counterintelligence has the key. Dovie Johnson Roundtree, 54 years old, served in the Women's Army Corps in World War II, admitted to the District of Columbia Bar, a federally ordained AME minister, and on October 28, 1964, Dovie Roundtree walks into the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia and files her appearance as the defense attorney for Raymond Crump Jr. She's never met Crump before. She gets word that he's a poor laborer with no money for a defense attorney. She takes the case anyway. She stakes her career and her own money on it because she's convinced that Ray Crump didn't kill Mary Pinchot Meyer. The trial begins Monday, July 19, 1965. Criminal case number 930-64. Judge is Howard Cochran. The prosecutor is the Assistant U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, a man named Alfred Hantman. The prosecution calls 27 witnesses, introduces more than 50 exhibits, burns 5 full days of court time. The press is in the gallery every single day, and the laborers accused of robbing and shooting an aristocratic painter who happens to be the recently discovered former mistress of the recently assassinated President of the United States. If Ben Bradley, Tony Bradley, James Angleton, or Cord Meyer gets onto the witness stand and starts talking about her diary, every reporter in the courtroom is going to hear it. So Ben Bradley gets on the witness stand under oath and tells the court about the pocketbook with the cosmetics in it. You already heard that exchange. The prosecutor's star witness is Henry Wiggins Jr., the Esso mechanic across the canal, the man who saw the killer's face from 60 feet away, the man whose identification put Crump in handcuffs by 1:30 that afternoon. Roundtree gets Wiggins on cross-examination, and he falls apart. He admits he was looking through a chain-link fence the entire time. He admits the man he saw on the towpath was, quote, 5'8", 185 pounds. Ray Crump is 5'3", 130 pounds. Remember? That's a 5-inch height differential and a 55 weight differential between the man Henry Wiggins says he saw across the canal and the man the United States government is trying to convict. Roundtree writes that Wiggins' testimony left the prosecution case crippled. So Hantman calls his second eyewitness, a man named William L. Mitchell. Mitchell, per his own sworn trial testimony, is a United States Army lieutenant stationed at the Pentagon. He runs on the C&O Canal towpath most days during his lunch hour. He tells the court that at 12:25 p.m. on October 12, 1964, he was running west on that towpath. He passed Mary Pinchot Meyer going in the opposite direction, and a few minutes after he passed her, he passed a black man in a light tan windbreaker. He was walking in the same direction Mary was walking. He was following her, about 200 feet behind her. Mitchell describes the man as approximately his own size, quote, 5'8", 145 pounds. You see the problem? If the man Mitchell saw is the same man Wiggins saw, it's not Ray Crump, it's definitely somebody else. But Mitchell never identifies Crump. He says he saw a man in a tan windbreaker. The clothing matches Crump, the race matches Crump, the size doesn't. The jury has to draw its own conclusions. Wednesday, July 28, 1965, after 5 days, the prosecution rests. Dovie Roundtree stands up. Her entire defense lasts 20 minutes. She calls 3 character witnesses from Crump's neighborhood. The last is Crump's pastor at a Second Baptist church, and then she introduces one exhibit. The exhibit is Ray Crump himself, 5'3", 130 pounds, standing next to the defense table. In Roundtree's own words from her 2009 autobiography, quote, "He was my Exhibit A." The defense rests. Friday morning, July 30th, 1965, the jury returns its verdict. Not guilty on all charges. Ray Crump walks out of the courthouse a free man who the U.S. Department of Justice still considers the killer of Mary Pinchot Meyer. And yet the case is never reopened. It's never reassigned. Curious. To this day, the only man the U.S. government ever charged with Mary Pinchot Meyer's murder was acquitted by a jury 9 months later, and nobody's ever been convicted of anything. That's the official story. But the trial isn't the end of the William Mitchell story. It's the beginning. In the early 90s, a Connecticut journalist named Leo Daymore turns his attention to Mary Pinchot Meyer's murder. Daymore just published a bestseller about Chappaquiddick. He spends years interviewing people inside the case. He interviews Dovie Roundtree. She tells him that she tried in vain to speak with Mitchell before the trial. He never returned her calls. So Daymore starts looking for Mitchell himself, and he can't find him. Mitchell, per his own trial testimony, was a U.S. Army lieutenant stationed at the Pentagon in October of 1964. Daymore checks the West Point alumni directory. No William L. Mitchell. He checks the Army personnel database. No William L. Mitchell stationed at the Pentagon in 1964. The Washington Star reporter who covered the trial wrote that Mitchell was a math teacher at Georgetown University. Daymore checks Georgetown. No William L. Mitchell ever taught there. The Pentagon's own 1964 Department of Defense telephone directory lists William Mitchell at office BE 1035. Now, Daymore checks the 20 offices whose offices surround BE 1035. 15 of them have verifiable military records. 5 don't. Mitchell is one of the 5, so are 4 of his office neighbors. The Phantom Army lieutenant on the Towpath that day has no army. In late March 1993, Leo Daymore mails a letter to the last known address for William Mitchell, a property at 1500 Arlington Boulevard in Arlington, Virginia, that several researchers believe was an alleged CIA safe house. A few weeks later, the night of March 30th, 1993, Damon's phone rings at his Connecticut home. The caller identifies himself as William Mitchell. He says he's read Daymore's book, He'll Talk. Daymore takes notes on the call. The notes survived in his personal papers and have since been published. Now, per the notes, the man on the phone says of Mary Meyer's murder, quote, "On the murder, a CIA K, a CIA individual. K in CIA parlance is shorthand for contract, a contractor, a non-staff asset, the kind of operator who works for the agency without being officially employed by it." On October 2nd, 1995, Leo Daymore takes his own life at his home in Connecticut. The day before Daymore's death, William Safire publishes his New York Times review of Ben Bradlee's brand new memoir, A Good Life, the book that, for the first time in print, acknowledges Mary Pinchot Meyer's diary. In April 2012, an investigator named Peter Janney publishes a book called Mary's Mosaic. Janney was a Meyer family friend as a child. His own father, Wister Janney, was a senior CIA official who worked alongside Cord Meyer. After his book is published, Janney discovers something Daymore couldn't. William Lockwood Mitchell is still alive. He's living in California. Janney pursues him. In January 2014, in a law office in Oakland, California, Janney's attorney puts William Mitchell, age 73, under oath. The deposition runs 4 hours. Now, per Janney's own published account, the Mitchell testimony, it doesn't match what Mitchell told the jury in 1965. Janney then spends the next 2 years battling the United States Army, the National Personnel Records Center, and the Defense Finance Accounting Services through FOIA requests. He's trying to verify Mitchell's actual military service. The Army resists at every request. When the records finally come, they tell, again, a story that doesn't match William L. Mitchell's 1965 sworn trial testimony. Cord Meyer Jr. dies March 13th, 2001 in a Washington, D.C. nursing home. He's 80 years old. According to his longtime research assistant, Carol Delaney, in an interview given to journalist C. David Hyman, Carol Delaney asked Cord near the end who he thought killed Mary. Cord Meyer's answer, per Hyman's published account, quote, "The same sons of bitches that killed John F. Kennedy." I have to flag this one. C. David Hyman has been credibly accused over the years of fabricating interview content. When Peter Janney asked Hyman directly if he taped the interview with Carol Delaney, he didn't. The quote's in print, but we can't prove Cord Meyer ever said it. But Cord's CIA colleague E. Howard Hunt, on his own deathbed in 2007, reportedly told his son, St. John Hunt, that Cord Meyer was part of, quote, "the mastermind behind the events in Dallas." That's per St. John Hunt's published statements. Two different alleged CIA deathbed accounts about Cord Meyer, about Dallas. Take what you will from that. And remember the FBI file the Bureau shredded in April 1988? The one we showed you back earlier in this video? 24 years after Mary's murder, 11 years after Cord retired from the agency, 13 years before Cord Meyer died, a routine records purge, per the Bureau. Right. 61 years later, nobody outside a small circle of intelligent officers' wives have been allowed to read her diary. Nobody explained why the FBI destroyed her file in 1988. Nobody explained why an Army lieutenant with no verifiable military service testified at her accused killer's trial. Nobody explained why the chief of the CIA counterintelligence was inside her locked house the morning after she died, picking the padlock on her studio that afternoon. So, you tell me what happens when a woman knows too much. You tell me what happens when a wife snitches. Tell me what happens when a diary tells the truth and a counterintelligence officer has a furnace. This is the story of Mary Pinchot Meyer, 43 years old, painter, mother, niece of a governor, ex-wife of a CIA officer who ran Operation Mockingbird, sister-in-law of a man who'd edit the Washington Post, secret lover of the 35th President of the United States, murdered on the C&O Canal Towpath on October 12, 1964. Killer unknown, diary destroyed, case unsolved. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.